Howdy stargazers, and welcome to this special episode of Star Trails. My name is Drew, and I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to discuss a song that's been stuck in my head for weeks now. If you recall a few episodes back, I mentioned the first production car in space was a Tesla Roadster that SpaceX launched into a giant heliocentric orbit. In the seat was Starman, a mannequin wearing a spacesuit, and the song Space Oddity by David Bowie was playing on a loop.
Ground control to Major Tom.
And since that episode, that song has been playing on a loop in my head. I've played along with it on my guitar. I've listened to alternate versions of it. I've studied covers of it by well-known artists. I've been absorbed in its history and disturbed by the story it tells. I've tried to learn how it was made, and last night, I even played it on a ukulele at a weekly jam session I attend. I've always admired this song, along with many others in Bowie's catalog, but it wasn't until recently that I really listened to it from both a narrative and harmonic perspective. And the more I learned about this song, its history and usage through the years, and its connection to space exploration, which existed from the moment it was released, I just seemed to enjoy it even more. So in this episode, I'm going to break down 1969's Space Oddity, David Bowie's very first hit song.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade.
This isn't just a story about an astronaut. It's about drifting, physically, musically, and emotionally. To properly investigate it, we need to set the scene. Space Oddity was released in 1969, right in the hottest stretch of the space race.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goes.
In 1961, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, famously musing about Earth's blue color from orbit. Not long after, Alan Shepard became the first American in space, and the race was on. Just 8 years later, the United States was preparing for something that seemed impossible, landing a man on the moon.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
Okay, we got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program.
The previous year, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey was released. A slow-burn science fiction epic about a rogue AI and mankind's evolution from club-wielding early primates to a spacefaring civilization.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
And even the title, Space Oddity, feels like a response to Kubrick's film. It's not an odyssey, as in a grand heroic journey, but it is something strange. These world events, and especially the movie, were factors that inspired Bowie to write Space Oddity, a sparse, psychedelic folk song about an astronaut, Major Tom, who achieves orbit and the fame that goes with it. Yet something on his mission goes awry, and he helplessly watches Earth as he drifts away in space, presumably lost forever.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Like a stage play or film, the song follows a 3-act structure. We start from an orderly place, the control room of a launch facility.
Take your protein pills and put your helmet on.
Major Tom is established as the hero. A countdown to liftoff quietly begins.
7, 6, commencing.
If you're listening to the stereo version of the song, the countdown happens in your left channel, while Bowie's vocals occupy the right channel.
And may God's love be with you.
In fact, in the stereo version, all the elements of this song are hard-panned left and right, which was a common technique of the era. I'm going to go over this more in a bit. In Act 2, Major Tom has achieved orbit, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear, which I interpret as Tom achieving fame for his accomplishment. People are obsessed with him, much in the way celebrity reporters ask film stars who they are wearing at red carpet events.
And the papers want to know whose shirts you wear.
And now it's time for Major Tom to take his spacewalk to leave the capsule if he dares. However, something is wrong. Tom says he's floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different. There's a shift in the song's tone here. A guitar solo seems to send us farther into space, and when we return to the story, Major Tom is 100,000 miles away, virtually halfway to the moon. He makes one final plea.
Tell my wife I love her very much. She knows.
Meanwhile, ground control is panicking.
Gets dead. There's something wrong. Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear
In the final act, Major Tom seems strangely at ease with his predicament. Now he's floating far above the moon, watching Earth from afar.
Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do.
A cacophony of instruments and noise rises and eventually fades out as the song ends. And I'm immediately reminded of the ending of 2001, A Space Odyssey, when Dr. Dave Bowman takes a trippy journey through space and time before his transformation into the Star Child. The story of Major Tom is eerie and melancholy, but what makes it really unsettling is everything happening underneath it. Space Oddity mostly orbits around the musical key of C major, but Bowie tosses in some gimmicks that make the song feel quite unstable. Without getting too far down into a music theory rabbit hole, let me explain what I mean by the song's key. Songs generally revolve around a tonal center, especially pop songs, which often cycle through the same 3 or 4 chords. Chords are derived from the musical key the song is written in. So imagine sitting at a piano and pressing only the white keys. Congratulations, you're playing in the key of C, which has no sharp or flat notes. To form chords, we look at the major scale of C, which is only 7 notes, starting with C, D, E, and so on, until we circle back around to C again, now an octave higher. C, being the first note in the scale, means we can use it as the root note of the 1 chord, which is C major. Let's go a few notes up to E. This is the 3rd note in the C major scale, which means it's a minor chord. Here's the melancholy E minor. In the opening verse, Bowie alternates between the C and E minor chords, which from the outset produces a feeling of drift or oscillation. As we move deeper into the verse, Bowie moves to A minor, but steps slightly outside the key and plays a D7 with F sharp as the bass note. That 7 chord imparts a certain bluesy or twangy sound here. The real outlier is the F sharp for the bass note. Remember, C has no sharps or flats. Here's what it sounds like. Bowie includes additional chords that aren't strictly diatonic, meaning they aren't part of the key of C. These are called borrowed chords, since we're taking them from adjacent keys, and some examples of this include moves from F major to the borrowed F minor during the verses. And then there's B flat, just a step lower than C, that introduces the Planet Earth is Blue line. And then there's this great transitional chord progression. That ends in 2 strums of A major, also a borrowed chord. The reason I'm harping on these borrowed chords is because they make the song feel emotionally unsettled. When you hear one, it feels familiar but just slightly off. These borrowed chords aren't mistakes, they're used intentionally, like the music itself is stepping outside its comfort zone. And that mirrors what's happening in the story. Major Tom leaves the safety of Earth, and the unstable harmony follows him. There's another huge musical decision here. Major Tom doesn't go home in the end, and neither does the music. And what I mean by that is the song doesn't neatly resolve back to its tonal center of C major. Pop songs generally wrap up by returning to their 1 chord. For example, here's a simple progression that goes home to C major in the end. Space Oddity doesn't do that. In the ending freakout section, it seems to leave the key of C altogether, drifting to D major and finally to E major. That leaves us feeling stranded as the music fades out, and that is a very intentional songwriting decision. I'd also like to take a moment to discuss instrumentation and production. Listen closely to these opening moments and see if you can hear a buzzing organ-like drone under the guitar chords.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom.
That weird sound is Bowie playing a stylophone, a handheld synthesizer that was marketed to children. It came out just a year before this song, so it was a new futuristic instrument. It kind of sounds like a buzzing radio here. By sliding the instrument's stylus over the metal keyboard on top, you can produce eerie wah-wahs and squeals. Interestingly, Bowie was a big fan of the stylophone, and you can even buy a new iteration of it with a Bowie theme, including instructions for how to play several songs. Space Oddity is one of them, of course. As the song builds, another high-tech instrument of the time can be heard. Listen to the wall of symphonic strings here. That's not a string quartet, that's a Mellotron, an early keyboard instrument that doesn't generate sound like a synthesizer, but plays back actual recordings on strips of magnetic tape. Each key triggers a real violin or choir, but it sounds frozen in time and mechanical. And because it's tape-based, it's never perfectly stable. The pitch wobbles slightly, the timing isn't exact, and if you hold a note long enough, it just runs out. You've probably heard songs featuring the Mellotron. It was famously used for the flute sounds at the beginning of Strawberry Fields Forever by the Beatles. A real example of a Mellotron is expensive, but I have a couple excellent simulations of it here on my production machine. There's just something about these sounds recorded long ago that's so haunting. This particular emulation I'm playing is made by Arturia and features actual sounds recorded from a vintage Mellotron. In Space Oddity, this sound fits perfectly. It doesn't feel grounded or alive. It feels distant, fragile, like a signal drifting through space, slowly fading as it goes. The recording process also contributes to the song's ethereal quality. There's a generous use of reverb and echo, which pushes sound away, making them feel distant, like they're floating in a vast space. There's also subtle tremolo on the electric guitars, a gentle pulsing in the volume that keeps sustained sounds from ever feeling completely stable. And then there's the stereo mix. I already mentioned how the instruments are panned hard to the left or right, but here it creates something more psychological. Instead of a cohesive band, you hear elements separated, almost isolated from each other.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Together, all these subtle choices are doing some real world building. So what actually happens to Major Tom? Well, no one really knows because Bowie keeps things deliberately ambiguous. This isn't a song so much about an astronaut as it is about isolation and emotional disconnect. Tom no longer feels connected to our world. Maybe it's a meditation on the price of fame itself, being adored by the planet, but feeling withdrawn and alone. The question that comes to mind is, did Major Tom willingly send himself adrift into the void because he seems at peace with the consequences? Another idea is that maybe he experienced some version of the overview effect, that feeling astronauts report after seeing the Earth from afar. It's the realization that Earth is a fragile place, that humanity's problems are small and insignificant, and the sobering realization that our world is a very, very small place in an expanding universe. We can find more clues to the song's meaning scattered throughout Bowie's 5-decade-long career. The song Ashes to Ashes is considered something of a sequel to Space Oddity, largely owing to a line in its chorus which asserts Major Tom is a junkie.
Ashes to ash and funk to funky. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low.
Now, I personally don't like the idea of Major Tom as an addict, but this is what Bowie has given us. I prefer the song Starman, which in my opinion sounds like the true sequel.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky.
Consider this interpretation. Major Tom disappears, and like Bowman in 2001, he returns in an evolved form, the Starman. However, Bowie never canonized that. Starman is on the Ziggy Stardust album, so it's related to the narrative arc of Ziggy Stardust, the rock musician from Mars. But again, there's the idea of isolation. The Starman would like to meet us, but he's afraid humanity isn't ready for him. Bowie loves to create these characters in his songs. Ziggy, Major Tom, Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke, and so on. Major Tom could be Bowie himself. Maybe Major Tom becoming a junkie is Bowie being self-referential about his own drug problems. However you want to frame it, it's interesting to see how many space references Bowie peppers throughout his work. Aliens are messengers, space is otherness, and contact is dangerous.
Is there life on Mars?
And right up to the end, Bowie was singing about space. His final album, Black Star, was released in 2016, just before his death. It's abstract, symbolic, almost ritualistic, but filled with cosmic imagery, stars, voids, death, transformation, It feels like crossing into something unknowable, and Bowie, near death, literally was.
Diamonds in my eyes. I'm a black stone. I'm a black stone. Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter than...
Space Oddity has been covered by a variety of artists through the years, including a note-for-note rendition by Def Leppard that even places the sound in the stereo field exactly like the original.
Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on.
However, one of my favorite renditions is by the Flaming Lips, who lean hard into the psychedelic aspect. But Space Oddity has achieved a cultural status that goes beyond rock music. It began life that way. In 1969, the BBC used it as the background music for its coverage of the Apollo 11 moon landing. It seems they didn't pay much attention to the lyrics. It was selected simply because it sounded spacey.
At this moment, Apollo 11 is nearly 35,000 miles out from Earth and heading for the moon at 7,000 miles an hour. Everything about the mission has gone so perfectly that a mid-course correction due early...
Even Bowie was nervous about its use, fearing that if something went wrong on the mission, his song would be forever linked to a tragedy. Decades later, the song found its way into orbit. Astronaut Chris Hadfield recorded the first music video in space aboard the International Space Station, playing Space Oddity on a guitar and singing a modified version of Bowie's lyrics. This time, the astronaut makes it home.
Though I've flown 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And before too long, I know it's time to go. Our commander comes down back to Earth and knows.
And now, more than 50 years after the last crewed missions to the moon, a new chapter has begun. As I'm recording this episode, 4 astronauts are on a journey deeper into space than any human has traveled before. The Artemis II mission will loop around the moon and return to Earth, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. It's our first manned moonshot since 1972. I don't know if they're listening to Space Oddity, but they're following a path first taken by Apollo 11 in 1969, the same year the song was released. I suspect we'll still be listening to this song even 50 years from now. There's a certain irony in it. A song about drifting into the void of space somehow reminds us what's at stake here on Earth. Well, folks, I think I've finally purged this tune out of my own head, but I apologize if it's stuck in yours now. Thanks for taking this journey with me, and if you have any thoughts on this song or the episode, be sure to leave me some feedback over at the show website, startrails.show. If you found this episode interesting, please share it with a friend who might enjoy it. The easiest way to do that is by sending folks to the website. And if you'd like to support the show, use the link on the site to buy me a coffee. That really helps. Be sure to follow Star Trails on Blue Sky and YouTube. Links are in the show notes. Until we meet again beneath the stars, clear skies, everyone.